Good morning all and welcome to today's masterclass. We're just going to give it a few more minutes to around 10 just to let a few more individuals join. So please feel free to make your last minute's coffee or teas and grab your notepads and we'll kick off at 2 past 10.
We're not on there, are we?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Gosh, right.
Fantastic. I can see that we've got quite a few in the waiting room. So we're going to kick off today. Good morning all and welcome to our SME Excellence series. This is the next installment, the basics of procurement. Thank you for joining today. My name is Jade Christie. I'm the consultant at Connected Places Catapult. And today we'll be taking you through the world of procurement. So whether you're looking to refresh what you already know, whether you're looking to learn new skills and how to actually attract and bid for funding, this is the place to be. Just want to encourage you to please, a little bit of housekeeping, please keep your camera and your microphone off throughout the presentation. We do have the Q&A function available, so if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please do put them in the Q&A section and then we'll get to them at the end of the session. Please do get interactive. Please fill up the Q&A as much as possible. We like these masterclasses to be interactive. So if you do have any questions that are specific to you, we could take them at the end or offline. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our presenter today. It's Hannah Bryant to run you through the world of procurement. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So just a bit of introduction to me before I run you through the slides. So my background, I was a procurement consultant for about 15 years, helping public sector organisations and private organisations get more efficient, save money, work more with SMEs, rationalise suppliers, bring more innovation into what they were doing. So that's organisations like, local authorities, the MOD, central government, a lot of private sector companies too. And so I did that for 15 years. I then took a career break. During that time, I had an entrepreneurial friend who was trying to get funded by Innovate UK. Helped him get funded and realised there was an opportunity to start a business helping people get Innovate UK funding. Did that, got people funded, and then realised that people were struggling with that next step of moving from having built and developed something. How do they then get some commercial traction? How do they get their first commercial contracts, be that in the private or public sector? So I've gone back full 360 to the beginning of my career and used the knowledge that I've got from having now sat both sides of the table in terms of the person trying to do the procurement exercise, but equally the SME trying to sell in. So I really understand the challenges you're facing in terms of you've done that early R&D, you've probably done some trials, you're then trying to move that into early commercial contracts, and that's really where my expertise lies, and that's the work that I support CPC in doing with their programs, but also privately with my clients, and I work across a range of industries, so I've got quite a few different reference points that I can draw on. So today, in terms of what we're going to look at, we're going to talk about private and public sector procurement, and we're going to take it back to the beginning and think, okay, what are the differences? Some things they do the same, some things are very different, but we'll go through those. We're then going to take a bit of a deep dive into public sector procurement. As you may know, there's quite a bit of process and terminology around it, to explain some of that to you, and then also bring you up to speed with the what I'm still calling the new Procurement Act, even though it came in last year. But there are big changes there for SMEs that we need to understand. And then we'll take a look at, actually, irrespective of whether it's private or public sector clients that you're trying to get, what are some of the things you need to think about when you're responding to a tender. And then at the end, I wanted to do a couple of things around selling innovation. Chances are, if you're on this call, you've been developing something innovative. You're trying to change the behaviours within the industry that you're trying to engage with. So there are some specific things that you really need to be thinking about, and I wanted to sort of share some of my thoughts around that with you as well. And then we'll leave lots of time at the end for any questions that you've got. Right. So starting with private sector procurement, typically this is a much more relationship sort of based exercise. And what is really important, you'll do your business development activity, and within the private sector, you're typically invited to respond to a tender requirement. So it's key that you've done that business development, that people know who you are, and that they are aware that you exist, and they should include you within their procurement process. It's very hard to make blanket statements because we could be talking about a range of different spend areas here, but it's very likely to be a one-stage document process. So because they're curating who they're inviting, they know how many responses they're going to get, so they tend to package it up into a one-stage process. So they'll send you a document with all of their requirements in, and you'll respond to that. Within the private sector, supplier presentations are very common, so you could expect that, subject to putting in a good response to their tender, that they would then invite you to a supplier presentation or meeting, whereby they would talk through more about what you could potentially offer them. So that tends to be how it works in the private sector. Within the public sector, though, it's slightly different. So there are some really strict rules that govern how they can operate their procurement processes, and those ensuring fairness and equity for everybody. So there are, and these are driven really around spend limits. So anything over £130,000 contract value will be advertised on something called Find a Tender, which is a website where opportunities are advertised. There'll then be strict rules by the different types of public sector organisation as to what happens with spend below that. So each organisation will have its own clear rules as to what they'll do, but it may be that they have to get 3 quotes. It may be that even for lower value items below 130k, they may still put things on Find a Tender. It very much varies by organisation, so you have to think about the organisation you're trying to target. However, they will have it all written down, and it'll all be clear. It's very often tenders with them tend to have, within the public sector, can have multiple stages. Again, because they're advertising to and anybody could respond, they don't necessarily want to be managing such a huge number of tender responses. So they may do a 2-stage process whereby everybody responds, and then they take 5 through to a more detailed process. And we'll come on and talk about what that could look like later. It is going to be a document-heavy process. There's no other way of them doing it. That is what it can look like. And it may or may not involve a supplier presentation at the end. It's not uncommon that entire procurement processes go through without there being very little discussion between you and the buyer. Things are changing, but that is relatively common. So some of the things that tend to be unique to public sector procurement. There are things called frameworks. Now, a framework is basically a pre-qualified marketplace that is put in place for a requirement to be tendered via. And these frameworks can be put in place by specific organisations that are responsible for doing that type of activity, or it could just simply be 3 NHS hospitals that are all located near each other decide that they want to put a framework in place for some sort of clinical supplies, and then that there would be 3 or 4 suppliers on that framework, and then any time one of those 3 hospitals wanted a particular thing, they would then run a smaller tender process within that framework. And they, being on as a supplier, being accepted onto a framework doesn't guarantee you any work, but it does potentially increase your chances of getting some work, because you're in a much smaller marketplace when you're sort of competing against other suppliers, and they're let for a specific period of time. So some of the organisations that put these in place, and the ones you may have heard of. So in terms of consortia, the most sort of well-known one is this Crown Commercial Service. If you go onto their website, they have a huge number of frameworks out there. They are responsible for things like G-Cloud, which you might have heard of, or Spark, which is another one of their well-known ones. So if you're looking to look into consortium and frameworks, they're always a good place to start. Then you get other consortia, some that came out of the local authorities. So as you can see there, ESPO, NEPO and WIPO, they've come out of basically a group of local authorities buying together in a particular region. However, the frameworks that they let now can be used by public sector organisations across the UK, and can be accessed by a whole variety of different types of public sector organisation, not just local authorities. It's very important when you are looking at what framework you potentially want to join as a supplier, that you read the detail of who can actually purchase through that framework and its applicability, because the rules it'll be clearly stated when the framework was let, and that doesn't change during the lifetime of the framework. But consortia are something that's incredibly common in the public sector, and you will if you're going to be trying to get public sector contracts, it's well worth understanding this particular landscape. So some of the terminology, you do get some of this in private sector as well, but it's much more common in public sector. So if you see the acronym RFI, that is a request for information, and it's where a company is seeking some information from suppliers, typically to shape how a future procurement activity might look like. So as an innovative supplier who's trying to get your first contracts and get real traction, they're a real opportunity for you to share information with buying organisations as to your solution, your approach, and who you are. So I always say people in your position they're a really good thing to be looking at. I'll come on and explain in a moment where that sort of activity can be found. People then also talk about a supplier questionnaire, or a PQQ, pre-qualification questionnaire. So this terminology, it tends to relate to where there's a 2-stage process being used, and at the moment with the new Procurement Act, a lot of that activity is captured via what's known as a central digital platform, which again I'll come on and explain in a moment. So the ITT is the main crux of the tender. It's where all the documents are held, and it's made up of things like the statement of requirements. So exactly what are they looking to buy? What's the challenge that the purchasing organisation is facing? What do they want from suppliers? There'll be the supplier questionnaire potentially in there if it's a 1-stage process. So that would be the bit where you would talk about your company, your policies, your registration numbers, all of that type of thing. There's then things like the terms and conditions that any future contract would be let under. There'll be instructions as to how to actually respond to the tender. And then there'll be the quality questionnaire, which is the questions that you need to respond to as a supplier. So things like, what team will be delivering this requirement? How would you go about it? Tell me what technology you're going to use, all those sort of questions that you get within a tender. And then there'll be the pricing schedule where you share what your commercial proposition is. Each buying organisation does things differently. So what you need to do is go onto your procurement portal and download the documents that are there and read through them thoroughly. everybody does things slightly differently, so you need to be all over all of those documents and very comfortable with them. Within private sector procurement, they will take elements of this type of pack, but it won't be so onerous in terms of documentation. So the new Procurement Act, I say it's been around since February last year. And the big changes it made from a supplier perspective are that now there are 3 procedures that tenders can run to. And the whole idea about this was really to make things easier for buying organisations to build in more sort of flexibility and more of the sort of things that help when trying to assess new innovation and working with SMEs and all those sort of things. So they've got the standard open procedure, which is this one-stage process that they've always had, and is we'll put an advert out there. You click on the advert, download the tender documents, and you'll respond with in one set of documents, and that'll be the process. Then you've got a competitive, flexible process. Now, this is the new thing, and this is basically about giving buying organisations the opportunity to, create the procurement process that they best see fitting this requirement. So, do they want to do a site visit, for example? Do they want to go and see where you're operating elsewhere? Do they want supplier presentation built into there? They can put whatever elements they want within that to create their own tender process, but all of that has to be stated up front. So that'll all be clearly stated in the advert as to what's going to be, how the procurement's going to be run. And then there's something else called a direct award. So there are those three procedures under the new Act. Then there's this, the other big change for you as a supplier is this central digital platform. And this is where you hold all of your company information. Previously, when you were responding to tenders, you were filling in the same questions about, what's your VAT number? Where's the company registered? Who's the significant shareholders? All of that type of information. And you were filling it out in multiple different formats for each different tender that you were going through. It was wasting huge amounts of time. So there is now this central area where it's all held. Again, I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And then find a tender, which is the place where all public sector tenders are advertised. There is much more information around the pipeline of what future opportunities are coming. And then the big thing, which if you're new to procurement now, it's such a great thing, is that the frameworks that I've previously talked about, you are going to be able to join during the lifetime of them. So just because it was let, say, in January this year, but you don't come across it till September later this year, you can still join that framework subject to going through an application process. Historically, that's not been the case, and that's meant that people have been locked out of getting on frameworks for 3 or 4 years. But going forwards, any framework let since February last year, you can join. So central digital platform, it can be accessed via the Find a Tender website. If you are looking to do any sort of procurement with public sector, as a supplier, you should go on and register. As of the 1st of April this year, all suppliers to public sector have to be registered on the central digital platform. So even for, if you're responding to a tender or a request for information or anything below, request for quotation rather, anything below, anything to do with public sector, you have to be able to share your central digital platform registration. So if you're not on there already, it's worth going on and doing it. It doesn't take a huge amount of time, but you do need to be on there. So you go on, you complete your registration, and then it gives you a code, and that code is what you share with different buying organisations who can then go in and access your information on that platform. You can reuse a code, so if you've got one code for and you've done a tender, say this month, and nothing's changed, you can use the same code next month when you apply for a different tender. But if you change any of your details on the central digital platform, you need to generate yourself a new code so that they get access to your latest information. So I talked about the fact there was greater visibility on Find a Tender for you as suppliers, and this can be really interesting when you are looking to start your public sector tendering activity. You can go back in time and look at all of these different information sources that are available, but also you get now pipeline notices and planned procurement notices, preliminary market engagement notice. There's a lot of notices, but gives you lots of information as to future tendering activity that potentially is going to occur. So that gives you a chance to then sort of plan who would you, if you need to find some subcontractors, if you need to find someone to partner with, you've got that opportunity. So a big change with this new Procurement Act is to really rather than tenders just dropping and everybody having no visibility of what was happening in the future, there is much more planning behind it, and that can be really useful for you as a supplier. Now, because the system only came in on the 25th of February last year, we are sort of working on a dual system at the moment. So if you leave here today and you say, okay, I really need to be on a framework, I'm going to go and look at the CCS website. When you get there, you'll discover that anything let before last February is running to the previous set of procurement rules. So if you want to join that framework, unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to join it because it was let before last February. However, prior to last February, there were things called dynamic purchasing systems, DPSs. You might have seen DPS acronym around, and that is in essence a framework, but you can join it during the lifetime of. So if you were then on the CCS website and you were looking for a sort of framework DPS to join, you want to be looking for DPSs so that you can access those. And anything, if you find a DPS and you want to go to apply to go on it, the application process will be subject to the previous procurement rules. So it will be, there's the three processes there, and it would be one of those three that it would be let, or your application would go via. So for a period, we're going to have this sort of dual process in operation. Right. So where do public sector tenders get advertised, and how do you find them? Within the different countries, they have different websites. Most countries now, everything goes on Find a Tender. That's always where you should start. But it is worthwhile sometimes looking at Sell to Wales and others, because you do see things on there that you don't see via Find a Tender. So I just wanted to show you what Find a Tender looks like and what the notice will look like itself, because it can seem a little bit strange, but I wanted to sort of pick out the key things you need to be looking for. So this is the Find a Tender website. You search on the left against a keyword that you're interested in, and you can see the different procurement stages that the notices might relate to, and you can put a date range, a value range, or location, whatever parameters you want to put in place. So this is an example notice that I've got here for courier services. So when you click on one of those notices, you go to something like this. So it goes down by screen. So I've got various screenshots just to walk you through. So looking at this, you can see that it is with the British Council. It's courier services. And you can also see where it says it's a contract notice. So it's telling you that this is a requirement that they're looking to tender. It gives you a location and it gives you a contact. It'll then very importantly tell you under communication where you find all the tender documents and what you need to do to access those. It tells you who the contracting authority is and the law it's going to be subject to. It'll then come down, and within a tender, you can get lots, and lots are whereby different requirements are sort of packaged up into different packages of activity. Now, the tender will tell you whether or not you have to be able to supply all the lots on the contract, or whether you could put an application in for, say, lot one and lot 3, but not lot 2. So that's where you need to read the rules and see exactly how they're running the different tenders. And it will give you the CPV code that it is related to. On the search functionality, you can use the CPV code to search against, although I don't typically advise doing that, because I find that the people who are inputting these notices aren't always the best at picking the right CPV code. So I find a word search tends to work better than a CPV code search. And it tells you the main location where the contract's going to be carried out. And then it'll come on and describe the procurements, give you a bit of background, a bit of value, and then it talks about the evaluation criteria and how they'll award it, although there'll be much more detail on that in the actual tender document itself. And it tells you how long the contract's going to be. And then it will come on and talk to you about the actual procurement process and the procedure. So we can see here it's an open procedure. So that's a one-stage process. They're setting up a framework, and they want just one provider on that framework, and it's going to last 4 years. Right, so how do you search for these tenders? You can sign up to a whole raft of organisations that will happily do the searching for you. What you'll find is you'll get emails fired at you at all times of night and day, and the relevance will probably be questionable for a number of them. So what I tend to find is if people sign up for these services, they struggle to actually keep on top of reading all the emails. And so the value of it often falls away. So especially when you're starting out and you're trying to understand the sort of terminology that the public sector uses when talking about the sort of thing that you're providing, or indeed if you're providing something that isn't already being tendered for, if you're trying to change a market or change an approach, it can be quite valuable to do the searches yourself for a period to really understand the system and how best to use it for your organisation. So I always advise clients that you need to think the public sector is a huge thing. There's a whole raft of different organisations within it. So you need to think which sectors are relevant to you. So you've got local authorities, you've got housing associations, you've got emergency services, the MOD. You've got a whole raft of different organisations. Think really quite granular as to your relevance. You need to think about contract value as well as a new supplier. Is it realistic that you're going to get a £5 million contract, or do you need to be looking for lower value contracts? Again, whether or not you're looking to try and get on a framework or a direct contract with somebody as a lead or a subcontractor, think about geographical constraints as well, because you can put those parameters around your search. And then the other one to think about is, where do you have relevant case studies? It's very difficult to get new customers if you haven't got an existing case study in that area. So again, that could inform your search. And then when you are searching, my advice is take 10 keywords. You want to get them as in less generic terms, the better, because things like management, you're going to have pages and pages and pages. And this is where it can be really useful to look at previous bids that you've come across. What sort of language, what sort of keywords were they using in that? And my advice is always search for the previous 10-day period. Do a search once a week, but search for the previous 10-day period, and then you capture things that were potentially put on Find a Tender a bit later than they should have been, and you don't miss anything that way. And then it's very much about refining it over time and seeing the sort of terminology that works and finds opportunities for you. And then I think at that point, you could potentially think about outsourcing. So responding to a tender, and this is very much for public and private. Tender portals are very much where tenders tends to be managed via. In public sector, you'll see that via the notice. In private sector, you'd be given access to one to communicate via. Typically, all the communication for the tender goes via that process. And thing to say is there's a range of these portals in place. A lot of them feel like they were developed in the 90s and haven't really moved on. So they're quite painful to use, a lot of them. They're all very different and everybody seems to have a different version of. So when somebody tells you to access a tender portal, always leave lots of time to download the documents and for the upload afterwards, because as a supplier, they can be a bit of a minefield. So communicating with the buyer, this is something to be aware of. The rules around this are typically quite strict, especially in the public sector. And so my advice is read the communication you've had with them via paper and online, find out what the rules are, try and do your communication via the tender portal, and don't try and circumvent anything, because it can lead to you just being removed from the process totally. All tender processes have supplier clarification question period. So the documents are made available to you as suppliers. The idea is then that you go through them, make sure you're comfortable with them, and then any questions that you've got, you then would submit typically via the portal, and there's usually within the tender itself that there's a timetable, and within that timetable it'll tell you when you can expect your answers by. Certainly within the public sector, any questions that are asked, the question and the answer are shared with everybody who has downloaded those tender documents. So you just have to be mindful of whatever question you ask, you're happy with everybody seeing the answer to. And some sort of common questions, so the sort of things that you want to make sure that you know when you go through it, and frustratingly, some of the things that are quite often missed out of tender documents. The size of your answer, the sort of documents you can submit, whether your pricing includes VAT or not, any specifics on the actual requirement that you don't understand. This is your opportunity to ask it, and so make sure that you're really clear on what documents you need to submit, and then you can ask anything else that comes to mind as well, but they're the sort of main ones that you need to be thinking of. Within tenders, you typically see evaluation criteria, and you need to certainly within the public sector, but also within the private sector, you need to find them within the tender documentation, and then look at what they say. So some will be very clear like this. Others could be more wordy. Both of these are taken from real life tender examples. And so my advice is to go through, highlight what exactly it is they're looking for when they're awarding your marks for your answers, and then when I'm writing my tender, I would then have those particular highlighted sections there as almost a tick box, which I then go through for each answer to make sure that I've talked about additional benefits, that I've talked about improvement through innovation within my answer, so that when somebody's marking it, they can clearly see that I'm meeting the evaluation criteria. When I'm drafting something, my advice is don't ever draft more than 25% of the word count. Quite often you'll be given a word count or a page count that your answer can run to. So don't ever draft more than 25%, because if you, for example, you've got 400 words and you draft 500, you can reduce that down to 400 without materially changing what you're saying. But I've seen people draft like 1,800 words and try to get it to 400. You have to materially change what you're saying in order to be able to do that. So to make the process as painless as possible when filling in your tender, try and be really strict with yourself around word counts and page counts from the off. And the best way to structure your answer is subheadings. So if there's bullets within the question that they're asking you to respond to, make each bullet into a subheading, so they can clearly see that you've answered all of the relevant parts of the question, and then it gives a structure for your answer as well. Common mistakes that I've seen people, excuse me, common mistakes I've seen companies make when they respond to tenders. People do quite like to answer the question that they wish had been asked rather than the one that was actually asked. So make sure that you're definitely answering the question. Try to avoid technical language and explained acronyms. Technical language is fine, but you've got to make sure that it's easily accessible by everybody. It's very common when tenders are being assessed that it's not just the procurement team that will be not just the business owner or the person who really understands your solution potentially who'll be marking it. It could be the procurement team, it could be somebody from finance, from legal, it could be somebody from HR because they were short of evaluators for the tender process. It literally could be from anywhere else anywhere in the organization. So you've got to make it really easy for people to understand. I mean, I've put at the bottom there, you need that, could your gran explain it to me? It literally needs to be really accessible, whatever you're saying. And then some other things, solid text, no pictures make things hard to follow, missing key information. So always think about these sort of things when you've got your tender response. Have I fallen into any of these traps? And that comes into leaving enough time for the review process. So I always try and leave things 24 hours. Doesn't always work, but best endeavours. And I think it's always important at the end to you've got the response that you've written, you've got the specification you were given that in terms of this is what we want to buy, these are the issues that we have, and I literally go through and I highlight within the specification everything to make sure that I can see it in my response. So if it says something, have I addressed that? Then it gets highlighted. If not, then I know I need to go back and add that in, because that is the crux of what they're looking to procure. In terms of the clarification questions, always wait for the latest ones of those to be final version of that to be sent out, and make sure that there's no surprises there. But there's absolutely no value in responding to a tender early. They won't be looked at until the actual closing date. Just be aware of that, and always, especially with the tender portal, you don't leave it to the last minute. But certainly there's no value in going early. One thing that is quite specific to the public sector, which I think is worth talking about because it causes quite a bit of confusion, is social value. So all public sector procurement now is supposed to include social value as part of the assessment process, or any contract that's let is supposed to deliver social value. And when there'll be questions around it, it can be up to 20% of your total assessed mark is on your ability to deliver social value. So social value is not about delivering the contract itself, it's about what you deliver on top of that. And each contracting organisation will likely have some areas of focus. So it could be a local authority that says, we know we have a lot of challenges around youth unemployment. So we want people to be thinking about that in their response. Or maybe we've got a focus around the environment or whatever the sort of areas that they want to focus on. And so your challenge as a supplier is to come up and identify things that you will do on top of delivering the contract in that area to help with the particular challenges they're facing. So it could be that you offer to run an educational session for sixth formers in the area about your industry. Or it could be that you there's a whole raft of different things you could do. You could offer an apprenticeship. You could, from an environmental perspective, you could implement mileage tracking on your vehicles to reduce, emissions. A whole raft of different things that you can offer. And then what happens is that during the lifetime of the contract, when you're delivering it, you have to report against what it is you said you would do at the outset. So you've got to make sure whatever you're going to do, you say you're going to do, you can actually do. And obviously from a supplier perspective, that brings a lot more cost into it as well, potentially. So you need to be thinking from that angle as well. The other one I wanted to touch on was case study, because I think when you're starting out and when you're getting you're not a really big established name within industry, case studies are really important. And I think there's a variety of different approaches to how you think about a case study. But for me, and in this context of a tender or a business development pack, or anything that you're trying to send to procurement or a business owner that you're trying to engage with, I think you've got to think, what do you want them to get from a case study? And for me, as a procurement person, it was always, can I see myself in this case study? So do the numbers in it relate to my organisation? Oh yeah, you implemented this at 8 sites. Okay, well, we've got 8 sites, and it brought these benefits, and we did it within this time frame. Okay, well, I know I need to be able to do it quite quickly, so that's relevant. And it's those sort of mental ticks that you want somebody to be able to get from a case study. In order for people to do that, my advice around how you would put a case study together, I would always start with the sort of context of how you were appointed. So appointed following a trial, or appointed following a tender process, so that they've got the context of how you were appointed, the sort of challenge you were brought in to address, then a section around what you actually did, and the outcomes that you achieved. But the key thing with a case study is about being really specific around numbers and things, any sort of quantifiable things that you can put in there. So pounds saved, or people trained, how many sites you implemented against, over how quickly you did it. All of those sort of things really make a case study interesting to somebody to read and help them with seeing the relevance against their organisation. And then there's just some things around, we have the client name, a client quote goes a long way as well, and the client logo. Keep case studies to one slide or one page, and do them in with subheadings and bullets. Nobody really wants to read a whole 3-page detailed case study. You've got to make it easy for them to grasp the information, and I think that's a good structure for doing so. Supplier presentations. So if you do end up doing some supplier presentations, and I have to say I've sat through some truly shocking ones, which is what's caused me to pull this slide together. So when you're in the supplier presentation stage, you are at the stage whereby the buyer is really very interested in what you've presented to them on paper so far, but now they want to start to meet the people. They want to start to see the product in person. They're really sort of, this is the final stage to get yourselves over the line. At that point, it's really important that whoever the account manager is going to be, or whoever their contact is going to be from the point of actually delivering the service, that's the person who should lead on your side in terms of this presentation. That's the individual I'll have to work with. That's who they want to get to know, not the salesperson. The salesperson needs to start to take a back seat at this point. If you're going to take 2 or 3 people to the presentation, please make sure everybody's got something to say, and give everybody a specific area to focus on. I've seen a lot of people march in with a team of 5 people. One person speaks, and then everybody leaves, and then we're all sat here going, well, what was the point in bringing those 4? What do they do? It just feels weird. So give everybody a role. If your product is a physical thing that you can bring it with you so that we can touch and feel it and see it. That's really important. And at this point, unless they say otherwise, they only want to hear about how you're going to work with them. The time for case studies, the time for talking about how you do things with other people is sort of past. This should be all the focus should be about how you're going to help them and work with them on their solution. And always make sure that you are ready to you've got some questions that you can ask of them. It's a two-way conversation, even though it's called a supplier presentation. So my thoughts around selling innovative ideas. I think it's always interesting at this point to start to think about the buyer themselves and the sort of challenge that they're facing. So they've all got stated agendas around working with SMEs, and we've seen in the last 24 hours that all of the government departments have been coming out with what their SME purchasing targets are for 2028. So it's clearly stated that they want to do it, but there's a reality of doing it within the world that they work within. If you're a public sector buyer, a lot of it, and even a private sector buyer, but more so public, I feel, you're in essence managing risk. As a new supplier, you provide a real unknown quantity to them, and so for them to have that confidence to bring you into their world, to start working with you, and the chances are you're not the biggest supplier out there, so you've got to help them manage all of their concerns and work through their concerns. So I think it's really helpful if you think, if you were in their shoes, what would make them nervous about using you, and how can you help them overcome those particular issues? So always have that sort of mindset. Go at it with that sort of mindset, and I that will really help. So in terms of selling innovation, what I always say is it's all about being proactive. You can't just wait for things to be advertised, things to be sent to you. You've got to have a really clear focus. You've got to be building your pipeline, educating buyers to who you are, what you do, how you do it, how you differ. And that can be quite challenging when you are, as an SME, you probably, haven't got huge sales teams. How are we going to go about this? And this is where I think it's really important to think about your focus. So be it by a location, by sector, whatever the right metric is, but don't try and take on the whole of the UK. Be very focused. Then you can really drive your business development activity via that. So you can be, say, the Southeast is where we're going to focus, and we are going to talk to all the organisations within, I don't know, within the M25 or whatever the right one is for you, but really focus your activity. That will help you hugely from a time perspective, and from a just making the whole thing far more manageable. I think it's important to be ready to take on the small trials, the proof of concept projects, but with a clear expectation that this is going to be moving to a commercial perspective, subject to successfully achieving KPIs that you've agreed up front with them. Always be protective of your IP, obviously. Don't want to be giving that away. The other things that you could do, I think, especially if you're going to have public sector on your radar, then you really want to be trying to find a framework or an old DPS that you can join, because when you're having these conversations, if somebody wants to move to a trial, they're going to ask you, okay, how can I procure you? And a lot of conversations stall at that point because they don't want to do a big full procurement exercise. But if you can say, well, look, I'm on this framework, you could run a mini competition via this framework. That's a much more palatable way for them dealing with that. So that's hugely important for public sector ones. And then think about on the find a tender service. How can you find out future tenders? Are suppliers out there asking for input from buyers? From suppliers. Then that's a further opportunity for you. So I really would encourage you to be as proactive as possible. I think that was everything I had to share by the slides. So I'm very happy to take any questions that you've got. I haven't even checked the chat box, so what have we got?
Thank you very much, Hannah, for that presentation. Interesting enough, we did have some pre-questions that came through our SME network, which we could run through just to
Yeah.
get the ball rolling. So if you are a new sort of innovation or business, how do you build business confidence when new to the market? So I guess if you've created if you're a new organization, you're coming to the market, you're looking to sort of go for a tender for the first time, but you've not got that business traction. How do you sort of build that confidence?
So I think for me, you have to, I wouldn't personally, I wouldn't be going for a tender unless I've met with the buyer previously
Yeah,
and that I've got some relationship there, that they know of me. I think if you are just responding to a tender that has been just advertised, for example, and you've never met the buyer, I think you're brand new and you haven't got any traction and you haven't got any case studies that you can talk to. I think you're that's a real long shot. I think your time would be better spent meeting buyers, trying to get that first trial or that first commercial, whatever it is, something or case study that you can point to, and there are ways of doing that, be that via a tier one relationship, be that via one of the big consultancies and their innovation teams. Yes, I think definitely you're going to struggle without that sort of traction. Yeah.
yeah, and that's good to know because we on the SME network we got quite a varied bunch of organizations from sort of startups to sort of fully fledged organizations. Would you advise on potential partnering with any bigger organizations, joint
Yeah,
contract, sort of tender bidding?
absolutely. A lot of SMEs get going that way because that gives you your first referenceable activity. As I say, all the big consultancies out there have got these innovation teams that they work with SMEs via. Tier one relationships within transport are very well established, and there's an awful lot of SMEs that have got going via that kind of structure, or being a
Perfect.
subcontractor on somebody else's. I mean, that's another way of thinking about it. If you see a tender advertised and you know that one of the bigger players is going to go for it, then get in touch with them and say, well, look, can I do that piece for you? Is there an opportunity for me to subcontract that away from you?
That's a really good
Or
idea, actually.
proactively take that
Yeah,
view now already and think, actually, I would be better as a subcontractor for a few years to one of these bigger guys, and do it that way while you build up your knowledge of working with clients and your case studies and your contacts, etc.
perfect. Just gonna go to the chat function and see what we have. Um, there's a question here. Are there any guidelines or good practices on leveraging AI in preparing tendering submissions? Or is AI a sticky subject?
No, it's not. It can be really useful, but it's not going to do the complete job for you.
Yes,
And then the other danger, of course, is that you could be unwittingly putting your IP into an AI tool, which obviously isn't what you want to be doing. So it's very interesting. I asked AI last year, what can you do to help me write a bid, and what can't you? And it was the list of what it can't do was really quite lengthy. So it can't compare you to other businesses out there. It's going to help. It's not going to help you with positioning yourself against a competitor. It doesn't understand the marketplace like you do. So where I think AI has a lot of value is in terms of if you give it some text, it can make it read a lot better, and it can put the structure and the ideas that you give it, but you have to be feeding all the content to it.
yeah.
It could potentially do a review against the spec of what, have you answered every question? Have you all that type of stuff? But yes, you've got to be comfortable with it having access to all of your IP.
Or, I mean, it's yeah, a little bit of dangerous ground, I think, depending
Yeah,
on how you
indeed. I mean,
use
yeah,
it.
there's
Yeah,
definite value in it, but there's danger with it as well.
yeah.
And it's certainly not the sort of universal panacea for doing all bids.
Perfect. We got one from Javier. How can we strengthen our chances of being awarded the contract when we lack case studies in the specific geographic area of the tender, but have extensive experience delivering similar projects in other countries? While the methodology is highly adaptable, feedback suggests that local geographic experience is prioritized. How can we effectively address this gap?
Okay, well, I mean, fundamentally, if they're looking for local exposure, then you're going to have to find some means of doing it locally.
Yeah,
And there's a raft of things. I know that's not easy. That's very, very easy for me to say, but it's are you offering? Is it possible you can offer a trial? Is it possible that you could offer to anybody, even if it's not the same type of organization? But could you do something? I often have the discussion with people where they've got the opportunity to there's a big prize in public sector, there's a big opportunity there. But actually, if you can do something relatively quick and easy with the private sector, but you don't make much money at it, that's still a referenceable case study. It's still worthwhile doing it. And then you can still share that with somebody else. So maybe thinking a bit more creatively about how you could demonstrate it within the geography, but maybe not with that particular type of client is an option. It's very difficult to know without the context. But I also think that, again, if you put the case study in such a way as you relate it to their world with the sort of metrics that are interesting to them, try and show them that actually the fact that you could do it in another country isn't wildly different from being able to do it in the UK. And think about when you've put your case study together, what metrics are relevant to them, what features of what you've done elsewhere in the world relates to their world. Help them make that sort of leap. They're all options, I think.
perfect. That's a very good question. We have one from Alex. Are there any established networking groups for SMEs to meet, to form consortia, etc., that you would recommend?
So I'm not aware of any groups particularly, but quite often what you get as part of a tender process is a supplier briefing, especially when the buyer is thinking that actually I need 2 or 3 suppliers to work together here to deliver this solution. So it's always worth going to the supplier briefing event, and a lot of these are now online. And so within the chat box, people are introducing themselves, and I know a lot of bidding teams are formed via that sort of approach. So that's one potential option. But I'm not aware of sort of like a sort of platform or anything where you can sort of join to do that, I'm afraid.
Perfect. And finally, if you can't commit to the social value requirements on a tender, is there any other way to win the contract? Maybe any additional added value or invest in a local company?
No, social value is their metric, and that's what they're looking for you to deliver. You'd have to think of a way of shaping whatever it is you're trying to do with the local company into social value and against their agenda.
Perfect. I think that is it for today's questions. If there's any more? Oh, that is it for today. Thank you very much, Hannah, for today.
Jade,
Oh,
sorry. Oh, can we just hand over to Tolu quickly
Yeah.
after? Perfect. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, guys. Yeah, sorry, I had some laptop difficulties, so I was a bit late today. But yeah, thanks, Hannah, Jade, and Megan. So yeah, just really briefly, we're always on the lookout for ways that we can help SMEs like yourselves gain more knowledge and ultimately win more public sector contracts. Sometimes it involves us working directly with the buyers or working with yourselves. So to help that process, we're running a survey where we're going to try and get your direct feedback on areas that you're struggling to engage with the public sector, or any experiences that you've had where you think maybe things could have done a little bit better to help you win that tender. So what I'll do is I'll post the link to the survey in that chat. If you have a spare 5 minutes today, it will be amazing if you could fill it in, because that feedback will go directly to the local authorities and to public bodies who are looking to innovate and work with people like yourselves. So I'll post the link to that survey in the chat. And we're also going to be doing some in-depth interviews to get a little bit more knowledge if you'd like to take part in that as well. So please feel free to reach out to Jade, Megan, or myself if you'd like to take part in those interviews to try and get a bit more of your feedback directly to those local authorities. So thanks a lot, guys. I'll post that in there now.
Thank you, Tola. Thank you, Hannah, for today's presentation. Just as a reminder, the slides will be available post today's masterclass. So please do look out. Please do sign up to our SME network if you're not part of it already. We can keep up to date on our next SME Excellence series and the themes that are coming ahead. Yeah, thank you for today. If you have any questions, any Q&As, post this. Please do put it in the chat and we can get in touch post this masterclass. Thank you very much.